everyone. Welcome back to Mental Wealth Reads. I'm going to continue today with Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. We are going to start part 2, which is really exciting. This is actually my favorite part of the book. There will be more psychological terminology here, and probably still some references to his experiences at Auschwitz, but this is the part where he goes into logotherapy, which is his theory, what we call a theory in the psychology world, or his main study and main contribution to what we know as psychologists. So this is his own sort of therapy study that came out of these experiences, and he's about to kind of go more in depth. So I'm geeking out. I'm not gonna lie. I'm pretty excited. But without further ado, let's get started. I don't have super lot of time today, so I want to give enough time to read through part 1 because it's also a giant book and or a giant section. So I want to get through this, but also be able to talk about it too. All right, part 1 of part 2. Logotherapy in a nutshell. Readers of my short autobiographical story usually ask for a fuller and more direct explanation of my therapeutic doctrine. Accordingly, I added a brief section on logotherapy to the original edition of From Death Camp to Existentialism. But that was not enough, and I have been besieged by requests for a more extended treatment. Therefore, in the present edition, I have completely rewritten and considerably expanded my account. The assignment was not easy. To convey the reader within a short space all the material which required 20 volumes in German is an almost hopeless task. I am reminded of the American doctor who once turned up in my office in Vienna and asked me, "Now, doctor, are you a psychoanalyst?" Whereupon I replied, "Not exactly a psychoanalyst. Let's say a psychotherapist." Then he continued questioning me. "What school do you stand for?" I answered, "It is my own theory. It is called logotherapy." "Can you tell me in one sentence what is meant by logotherapy?" he asked. "At least, what is the difference between psychoanalysis and logotherapy?" "Yes," I said, "but in the first place, can you tell me in one sentence what you think the essence of psychoanalysis is?" This was his answer. "During psychoanalysis, the patient must lie down on a couch and tell you things which sometimes are very disagreeable to tell." Whereupon I immediately retorted with the following improvisation. "Now in logotherapy, the patient may remain sitting erect, but he must hear things which sometimes are very disagreeable to hear." Of course, this was meant facetiously and not as a capsule version of logotherapy. However, there is something in it, inasmuch as logotherapy, in comparison with psychoanalysis, is a method less retrospective and less introspective. Logotherapy focuses rather on the future, that is to say, on the meanings to be fulfilled by the patient in his future. Logotherapy, indeed, is a meaning-centered psychotherapy. At the same time, logotherapy defocuses all the vicious circle for formations and feedback mechanisms which play such a great role in the development of neuroses. Thus, the typical self-centeredness of the neurotic is broken up instead of being continuously fostered and reinforced. To be sure, this kind of statement is an oversimplification. Yet in logotherapy, the patient is actually confronted with and reoriented toward the meaning of his life. And to make him aware of this meaning can contribute much to his ability to overcome his neurosis. Let me explain why I have employed the term logotherapy as the name for my theory. Logos is a Greek word which denotes meaning. Logotherapy, or as it has been called by some authors, the third Viennese school of the psychotherapy, focuses on the meaning of human existence as well as on man's search for such a meaning. According to logotherapy, this striving to find a meaning in one's life is the primary motivational force in man. That is why I speak of a will to meaning in contrast to the pleasure principle, or as we would also term it, the will to pleasure, on which Freudian psychoanalysis is centered, as well as in contrast to the will to power on which Adlerian psychology, using the term striving for superiority, is focused. The will to meaning. Man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life and not a secondary rationalization of his instinctual drives. This meaning is unique and specific in that it must and can be fulfilled by him alone. Only then does it achieve a significance which will satisfy his own will to meaning. There are some authors who contend that meanings and values are nothing but defense mechanisms, reaction formations, and sublimations. But as for myself, I would not be willing to live merely for the sake of my defense mechanisms, nor would I be ready to die merely for the sake of my reaction formations. Man, however, is able to live and even die for the sake of his ideals and values. A public opinion poll was conducted a few years ago in France. The results showed that 89% of the people polled admitted that man needs something for the sake of which to live. Moreover, 61% conceded that there was something or someone in their lives for whose sake they were even ready to die. I repeated this poll at my hospital department in Vienna among both the patients and the personnel, and the outcome was practically the same as among the thousands of people screened in France. The difference was only 2%. Another statistical survey of 7,948 students at 48 colleges was conducted by social scientists from Johns Hopkins University. Their preliminary report is part of a 2-year study sponsored by the National Institute of Mental Health. Asked what they considered very important to them now, 16% of the students checked making a lot of money. 78% their first goal was finding a purpose and meaning to my life. Of course, there may be some cases in which individuals concern with values is really a camouflage of hidden inner conflicts. But if so, they represent the exceptions from the rule rather than the rule itself. In these cases, we have actually to deal with the pseudo-values, and as such, they have to be unmasked. Unmasking, however, should stop as soon as one is confronted with what is authentic and genuine in man. For example, man's desire for a life that is as meaningful as possible. If it does not stop, then the only thing that the unmasking psychologist really unmasks is his own hidden motive, namely his unconscious need to debate and depreciate what is genuine, what is genuinely human in man. Existential frustration. Man's will to meaning can also be frustrated, in which case logotherapy speaks of existential frustration. The term existential may be used in 3 ways. To refer to 1. Existence itself, i.e. the specifically human mode of being, 2. The meaning of existence, and 3. The striving to find a concrete meaning in personal existence, that is to say, the will to meaning. Existential frustration can also result in neuroses. For this type of neuroses, logotherapy has coined the term noogenic neuroses, in contrast to the neuroses in the traditional sense of the word, i.e. psychogenic neuroses. Noogenic neuroses have their origin not in the psychological but rather in the noological, from the Greek nous, mean mind, dimension of the human existence. This is another logotherapeutic term which denotes anything pertaining to the specifically human dimension. Noogenic neuroses do not emerge from conflicts between drives and instincts, but rather from existential problems. Among such problems, the frustration of the will to meaning plays a large role. It is obvious that in noogenic cases, the appropriate and adequate therapy is not psychotherapy in general, but rather logotherapy, a therapy that is which dares to enter the specifically human dimension. Let me quote the following instance. A high-ranking American diplomat came to my office in Vienna in order to continue psychoanalytic treatment, which he had begun 5 years previously with an analyst in New York. At the outset, I asked him why he thought he should be analyzed, why his analysis had been started in the first place. It turned out that the patient was discontented with his career and found it most difficult to comply with the American foreign policy. His analyst, however, had told him again and again that he should try to reconcile himself with his father, because the government of the U.S. as well as his superiors were nothing but father images, and, consequently, his dissatisfaction with his job was due to the hatred he unconsciously harbored towards his father. Through an analyst lasting 5 years, the patient had been prompted more and more to accept his analyst's interpretations until he finally was able to see the forest of reality for the trees of symbols and images. After a few interviews, it was clear that his will to meaning was frustrated by his vocation, and he actually longed to be engaged in some other kind of work. As there was no reason for not giving up his profession and embarking on a different one, he did so with most gratifying results. He has remained contented in his new occupation for over 5 years, and he recently reported. I doubt that in this case, I was dealing with a neurotic condition at all, and that is why I thought that he did not need any psychotherapy, nor even logotherapy, for the simple reason that he was not actually a patient. Not every conflict is necessarily neurotic. Some amount of the conflict is normal and healthy. In a similar sense, suffering is not always a pathological phenomenon. Rather than being a symptom of neuroses, suffering may well be a human achievement, especially if the suffering grows out of existential frustration. I would strictly deny that one's search for a meaning to his existence, or even his doubt of it, in every case is derived from or results in any disease. Existential frustration is, in itself, neither pathological nor pathogenic. A man's concern, even his despair, over the worthwhileness of life is an existential distress, but by no means a mental disease. It may well be that interpreting the first terms of the latter motivates a doctor to bury his patient's existential despair under a heap of tranquilizing drugs. It is his task, rather, to pilot the patient through his existential crises of growth and development. Logotherapy regards its assignment as that of assisting the patient to find meaning in his life, inasmuch as logotherapy makes him aware of the hidden logos of his existence. It is an analytical process. To this extent, logotherapy resembles psychoanalysis. However, in logotherapy's attempt to make something conscious again, it does not restrict its activity to instinctual facts within the individual's unconscious, but also cares for existential realities, such as the potential meaning of his existence to be fulfilled as well as his will to meaning. And any analysis, however, even when it refrains from including the noological dimension in its therapeutic process, tries to make the patient aware of what he actually longs for in the depth of his being. Logotherapy deviates from psychoanalysis insofar as it considers a man whose main concern consists in fulfilling a meaning rather than in the mere gratification and satisfaction of drives and instincts, or in merely reconciling the conflicting claims of id, ego, and superego, or in the mere adaptation and adjustment to society and environment. To be sure, man's search for meaning may arouse inner tension rather than inner equilibrium. However, precisely such tension is an indispensable prerequisite of mental health. There is nothing in the world, I venture to say, that would so effectively help one to survive even the worst conditions as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life. There is much wisdom in the words of Nietzsche. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. I can see in these words a motto which holds true for any psychotherapy. In the Nazi concentration camps, one could have witnessed that those who knew that there was a task waiting for them to fulfill were most apt to survive. The same conclusion has since been reached by other authors of books on concentration camps, and also by psychiatric investigations into Japanese, North Korean, and North Vietnamese prisoner of war camps. As for myself, when I was taken to the concentration camp of Auschwitz, a manuscript of mine ready for publication was confiscated. Certainly, my deep desire to write this manuscript anew helped me to survive the rigors of the camps I was in. For instance, when in a camp in Bavaria, I fell ill with typhus fever. I jotted down on little scraps of paper many notes intended to enable me to rewrite the manuscript, should I live to the day of liberation. I am sure that this reconstruction of my lost manuscript in the dark barracks of a Bavarian concentration camp assisted me in overcoming the danger of cardiovascular collapse. Thus, it can be seen that mental health is based on a certain degree of tension, the tension between what one has already achieved and what one still ought to accomplish, or the gap between what one is and what one should become. Such a tension is inherent in the human being and therefore is indispensable to mental well-being. We should not, then, be hesitant about challenging man with a potential meaning for him to fulfill. It is only thus that we evoke his will to meaning from its state of latency. I consider it a dangerous misconception of mental hygiene to assume that what man needs in the first place is equilibrium, or as it is called in biology, homeostasis, i.e., a tensionless state. What man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. What he needs is not the discharge of tension at any cost, but the call of a potential meaning waiting to be fulfilled by him. What man needs is not homeostasis, but what I call nuodynamics, i.e., the existential dynamics in a polar field of tension where one pole is represented by a meaning that is to be fulfilled, and the other pole by the man who has to fulfill it. And one should not think that this holds true for only for normal conditions. In neurotic individuals, it is even more valid. If architects want to strengthen a decrepit arch, they increase the load which is laid upon it, for thereby the parts are joined more firmly together. So if therapists wish to foster their patients' mental health, they should not be afraid to create a sound amount of tension through a reorientation towards the meaning of one's life. Having shown the beneficial impact of meaning orientation, I turn to the detrimental influence of that feeling of which so many patients complain today, namely the feeling of the total and ultimate meaninglessness of their lives. They lack the awareness of a meaning worth living for. They are haunted by the experience of their inner emptiness, a void within themselves. They are caught in that situation, which I have called the existential vacuum. Okay, I'm going to stop right there, just so I have time to talk about this, because there is a lot already that's been mentioned. I'm not going to be able to give a whole lot of time to everything, but what I do want to point out here is that basically the idea of logotherapy is simply that what drives a person to achieving things or even surviving things is the knowledge or the hope even of something beyond what they are experiencing, right? And it's definitely been mentioned before in earlier parts of the book, and I think I've even talked about it too. But just this idea that when a human being feels a purpose, they can overcome relatively lots of things, right? Like most things, if not all things, can be overcome, right? If you are aware that there's a purpose for, either the thing that you're going through, or there is a purpose waiting for you beyond what you're going through, and that's a very critical sort of worldview to have, especially in current times, where it can often seem like there is just not. There's a meaninglessness to the things that we're going through, right? As a country, as whatever social group you're a part of, whether you're a minority or not, it can seem meaningless, right? It can seem purposeless in the scope of your existence, right? And the fact that this came out of an experience with a concentration camp, that's an even bigger thing. I think that's pretty indicative of the fact that it holds a lot of weight, right? If Frankl can go into this experience and come out with this idea that, like, hey, like, the reason that we survived, for the most part, barring physical conditions, but even in those situations, the reason we survived was a hope of something after this, right? The hope that this would be temporary, right? And it's actually it's something that I ask my clients pretty often, if they're feeling a certain emotion, if they're feeling a hopelessness, if they're feeling anything negative, really. One of the questions I always try to ask is, well, do you think this is a permanent feeling, or do you think this is a temporary feeling? And it's a very important question, because the answer to that question will determine, just how much effort a person is willing to put into managing that feeling and regaining control over that feeling, right? And I have to say, I can't think of really any any clients that I've had, maybe one or two out of 100, we'll say, who have told me, yeah, of course it feels permanent. I don't think it's ever going to go away, right? But 98% of the clients that I've ever had, they've taken a second, they've thought about it, and they say, you know what? I believe it's temporary. I don't think it's going to last. And even just thinking that and saying out loud, that can be a game changer, right? That can be something that that makes a difference, like I said, in how the person approaches their mental health and regaining control over it. Because once you admit it out loud that, hey, this isn't forever, your brain almost like recircuits, right? And it allows, or it starts now thinking in terms of, well, if this isn't permanent, it's temporary. And if this is temporary, then there's something to hope for. And if there's something to hope for, then there's an incentive there, right? There's a reason why it's worth for me to try to overcome this, right? And so the foundations of logotherapy are just incredible, and very monumental for sure. I think what grabs me, both as a therapist and as an individual, right, is this idea that something so small, or something that seems so small, like just hope, right? Hope and faith in something better than what I'm going through. Literally a trick of the mind, that can overcome things that medication can't, right? Medication can do the chemicals in your brain so that different, synapses are firing and doing different things, and you feel happy when you're not, right? But long term, right, that idea of hope is far more powerful and far more changeable or changing, right? Far more impactful, I guess is the word I was looking for, than this idea of, I'll take medication. Now, as I say this, I want to just preface, there are people who certainly need medication, right? I'm not knocking people who have found that, meeting for talk therapy 3 times a week is not working the way that you need it to, and maybe you need a little bit of some med management to kind of help get you to where talk therapy is helping you. I absolutely support that, right? But what I am saying is ultimately what you train your brain to do without medication, that is going to last you long, if not for the rest of your life, right? Because nothing can do the job of an organic brain process, right? One that isn't getting any help from foreign chemicals, right? Or medication, because the brain is so smart, so self-repairing, as I said, that once it learns about that, once it attaches onto that sort of processing, it will continue to do that as long as it sees that it is something that is helping the equilibrium of the person, right? And I've mentioned this before, and Frockel mentioned this, to a degree too. That idea that the human brain is and body is self-repairing, right? The idea that it will always be trying to fix what is going on, and that's why we have therapy, because people realize in their body that their bodies are trying to tell them something's off, right? And they can't figure it out, and all their normal coping skills and all their environments and everything that they have are not helping it, and so they just need an objective third party. Hey, tell me what's going on. I think the last point that I want to make here also is this idea that as your body is trying to reconstruct itself, and going on my point of nothing beats an organic brain process, right? the brain is so powerful that it can do that, right? It's kind of like a glorified like habit forming. It's what I tell people. You know, we're retraining your brain to make the connections it needs to for you to be happy without having to struggle for it, right? That sort of a thing. And so, you know, your brain is just this incredibly powerful tool inside you, which can heal itself, which can train itself. You know, even the fact that like me, as a therapist, my job is to teach you things and put things inside your brain to help your brain fix itself. It's a slightly dizzying thought to think about, to be honest, but you know, it's very meta, as people would say today, like very you know, Inception like ideas, right? Because the brain is the only organ in your body that can do that, right? Your brain is the only organ that can use its own faculties to think and reflect about itself, right? And that's an incredibly cool thing, right? But like I said, the last point here is simply that, you know, it is very easy, especially when you are struggling with mental health, to think that this is the condition I am in. This is going to just be a problem for the rest of my life, and I'm just going to be struggling with this no matter what, and I couldn't possibly do this without, you know, any sort of, you know, like I said, alteration of my brain chemicals, with the help of medication and things like that. But the truth is, any person with mental health of any kind, or any person with a brain, right, can use their brain to fix their brain, right? And that, I think, too, is part of what's at the heart of logotherapy, is that, you know, in times of suffering, we don't need as much as we think to survive. We don't need as much as we think we do to overcome. Okay, simply what we need is the power of our own minds, the power of our brains to find something to look forward to, or to reach toward as a goal, or as a hope or an outcome, right? And we can get through anything, right? So I'm gonna leave you guys with that. I gotta get going shortly, but again, like I said, please leave me comments, questions, recommendations in the comment section, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.